Welcome to Knifemaking.com. Today we're going to take a look at how to make a Stonewash knife tumbler out of a standard Harbor Freight rock tumbler. Now this ended up being a very simple project. I did have a couple of little screw-ups along the way trying to figure it out, but nothing major, and the end result worked perfectly. So the result we're looking for is called a stonewashed finish. Knife makers will acid etch their blades, usually in ferric chloride, and what we're looking for is all of the little scratches and texture that's added by tumbling them in a rock tumbler. So this is the standard Harbor Freight rock tumbler. It's not nearly long enough to hold a knife. It comes with two separate canisters that are watertight. They're only about 4 inches long. And the body itself is not long enough to hold a canister that's longer than about 6 inches. So the first step was going to be to make a longer canister. And this was very simple. I used 3-inch PVC. With a little PVC glue, I just glued a cap onto one end and a threaded cap onto the other end. I made this long enough so that I could put a stonewash finish on knives up to 12 or 13 inches. The next step was going to be to cut out a portion of one side of the rock tumbler to allow that longer canister to fit. And I just used an angle grinder with a cutoff wheel, with a metal cutoff wheel. This is very thin metal. It goes through very quickly. Probably could also do it with tin snips. This angle grinder seemed like the easiest. So I just made a cut along the side and then 2 quick cuts in from both ends. And then I did put a flat sanding wheel on the same angle grinder. I just smoothed over all of the rough edges. I just didn't want any sharp burrs that could cut me. So the first thought, because this 3-inch diameter canister is a little bit smaller in diameter than the canisters that came with the unit, I was going to increase the diameter of the drive shaft so that my new PVC canister would kind of fit on top of that, or rest on top of that. So the first thought was going to be to use pipe insulation that I trimmed down a little bit and just secured with a couple of wire ties. And I really thought this would have worked, would have driven that PVC and raised it enough to get it past the side of the body itself. But it just didn't work out. Number one, it wasn't high enough. I ended up trimming some additional material off that side of the tumbler, but it just didn't work. So I threw out those foam pipe insulation pieces, and I got a small scrap of wood and a couple of casters from Home Depot. And I just screwed the casters onto a piece of wood, and I figured that would support the additional material. I then inserted the PVC canister right into the canister that originally came with the Harbor Freight rock tumbler. That's the black portion on the left-hand side. It was a perfect fit, just a press fit. This seems to work pretty nicely. The only issue with it is that it does have a tendency of walking forward or walking off of those 2 rollers. I'm going to start by using tumbling media, which I also got from Harbor Freight. This is actually the tumbling media that they recommend for their vibrating tumbler, but I figured I'd give it a try. So I inserted my knife with that tumbling media, ceramic media. I added a little bit of water, and this is a big learning curve for me. This is the first time I'm doing stonewashing. I secured the cap. Secured it nice and tight. I didn't want any of that water leaking out. And I'm going to let this run for about 15 minutes or so before I check it. I have to adjust that board a little bit just to get it to run perfectly, just to get it aligned. And depending on how I place that canister, will occasionally kind of screw itself forward and eventually fall off of those wheels. But I'll address that in a later modification. What I did while I was just testing this out is I put a small piece of foam underneath one end of that board holding the two canisters to get it lined up perfectly and to kind of tilt it back towards the machine so it wouldn't walk its way forward as easily. And I let this run for 15 or 20 minutes. And I was a little bit disappointed with the results. So the knife, when I first took it out, actually looked pretty good. I went and got a paper towel to wipe it off. And then I noticed that the scratches all seemed to be in one particular location, and there wasn't uniform scratches along the entire blade. So what was happening was that media that I bought was a little bit too large for the diameter of the PVC, and it actually wasn't turning. The knife was just flipping back and forth. So I threw that all away, and I just went and got some stones from my rock garden. Nothing special here, just small pebbles. I put those into the canister with a little bit of water, not a lot, and this ended up working out really, really nicely. You can see that I've also made a little adaptation to the rig here. I've secured the board with the casters to another board. I secured the tumbler to that bottom baseboard. And if you look at the smaller board that has the casters, I'm now also using these little leveling legs, which I picked up from Home Depot. So I drilled 2 3/8 holes and I inserted those, and that gives me the ability to adjust those up and down. Look at the screws on the other side. They're left a little bit long, and they're inserted through a larger diameter hole so that the board slides on those screws. So basically, with this setup, I can adjust those casters up and down with the 2 adjustable legs, so I can pivot it, but I can also adjust it a little bit left and right if I have to. So with this rig, it's very easy then for me to set it up and align it so that the longer canister is supported and rolls on the casters, but does not work its way or walk its way forward and off of those casters. So this now is set up to run for hours if you wanted it to. So the next step, or the next test, I let the blade tumble with the pebbles from my garden for about a half an hour. And the result was actually exactly what I was looking for. So this is an acid-etched blade in ferric chloride, and then it was stonewashed in this rock tumbler for about a half an hour with pebbles from my garden. And the end result is a very, very nice stonewashed finished. And a very easy, very affordable conversion from a Harbor Freight rock tumbler. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, I ask that you please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to this YouTube channel. I'd like to invite you to our Facebook group, Knives and Knife Making. And by all means, check out the book that Jason Northgard and I put out last year called Introduction to Knife Making, and that's available on Amazon.com.